In terms of the overall Affordable Care Act, I think much like a lot of the country, the MPL industry is kind of divided. Folks have different views on how they want to see the Affordable Care Act end up. In terms of medical professional liability in particular, there were no medical liability provisions in the original act, and so more or less, there's no direct connection to the industry if the ACA is repealed. Now, there are issues such as future payment of damages, which has kind of been an indirect link to the Affordable Care Act, so we'll have to see how that plays out. But in terms of where we'd like to see things go, the industry is really hoping that as part of the repeal and replace effort, that we'll get some tort reforms that we've been working for a number of years included in a package so that we can actually get some enacted at the federal level and make them nationwide for the first time. I find it very hard to believe it's going to survive as a simple fact that if there is no mandate, it's going to be harder for the insurer to guarantee that they can provide a policy to cover the alleged victim of the medical negligence. There would be some potential if the person's already covered by health insurance, and they say we'll pick up their coverage going forward, or potentially even say we'll pay the penalty that the person would have paid if they were getting insurance going forward. There's some potential for that to exist, but I think it's, well, I would say I'm a little skeptical of it at this point myself. Not a lot from what I've been able to see. So much of the regulatory side of things was focused exclusively on the healthcare insurance side of things, and because there wasn't much in the bill initially related to medical liability insurance, there's not a lot of room on a regulatory basis for him to do anything. We are certainly hopeful, however, that given his long-term support for medical liability reform, that he'll be able to use his bully pulpit to help when we get to phase 3 and we're trying to do something legislatively. The 250 cap, we feel, has really stood the test of time. In the states where it's been enacted, it's been very successful. If you look at California, which is kind of the gold standard for caps on non-economic damages, over the years they've been able to maintain a much more stable and consistent medical liability environment than other states have, especially other states without caps in place. The 250 number was picked largely because it does kind of represent the baseline below which very few states have gone, and we wanted to be consistent with what we've seen in California. The key to the bill, however, is that there's a flexibility provision in it that allows states to set a cap at any level they so choose under the bill. It just doesn't allow them to say nothing and not act on non-economic damages at all. In terms of the safe harbors, it's a very interesting concept, and it's interesting to note that it's been supported by both Republicans and Democrats over the years, although for the last couple of years it seems that only Republicans have been getting on board with some of the legislative proposals. The concern we have about it is kind of the hidden danger behind it. If a safe harbors law was in place that says a physician can't be held liable if they followed certain guidelines, our concern is that, one, will the guidelines actually be up to date and reflect the most recent trends in medicine that doctors should be following? We don't want doctors to get stuck feeling like they can't use the latest procedures or latest techniques that are out there because a guideline hasn't been approved for them yet. The other concern is that if those guidelines aren't going ahead fast enough and keeping up, will doctors be almost forced into kind of doing cookbook medicine, where they're just doing whatever the guidelines say, even if their patients, or in their minds their patients, aren't going to be best suited by receiving what the guidelines says. Maybe there's something newer or something a little different that they think might work better in those particular circumstances. I think our wish list would be pretty much the micro reforms in their total out there. So that would include, in addition to the non-economic damage caps, the limitations on attorneys' fees, collateral source rule reform with a ban on subrogation by the collateral sources, and periodic payment of future damages. Micro, of course, also includes a statute of limitations, but all states have that in place already. We've actually been working on a few other reforms at the federal level over the last few years, though, that we think have been fairly successful in the states, and we'd like to see those be given serious consideration as well. And that would include certificate or affidavit of merit to try to weed out some of the lawsuits before they get to court. apology protections for physicians so that doctors and their patients can have a full and open conversation about a suboptimal outcome and not worry about that conversation leading into evidence being used against the physician. And also cooling off periods. Several of the states have enacted these anywhere from 60 to 180 days or so, where it says the physician has to be notified in advance that a suit's being filed against them. And that, much like the apology protections, gives some time for the physician and the patient to talk things through and possibly come to some kind of resolution before actually resorting to litigation. Sure. I will be talking about some of the federal reforms that we've been discussing recently and kind of what we've seen happen with the Affordable Care Act over time and where that may go. One of the things I wanted to talk about is a kind of a little discussed document that the House leadership put out last year called The Better Way, which had its own version of tort reform in there. Touched on non-economic damages and on limitations on attorney's fees, but also got into some of the other reforms that we've discussed, such as safe harbors, health courts, and things like that. And it's a pretty broad spectrum of issues that leadership said they wanted to discuss last year, and we think those all could come up. And so I want to make sure that the folks here today will get the chance to think about those a little bit as well.